Hello and welcome to another episode of Challenger Network News. I'm Brandon Bichler, partner at Elixirr. It's good to have everyone back on another Friday, and I'm really glad to welcome some of my colleagues. So Manny Dhanda from Den Creative and Hermann Behrens from Elixirr. How you doing today, guys?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's good to be here.
Great. I was a little bit thrown off. I think we have some new we have a new intro there, don't we, Manny?
We do, yes, we do.
Manny's been helping us. We'll learn a little bit about what Manny's been helping us with, but he's helped us with that design of a lot of things lately, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the importance of design and the importance of alignment with brand and strategy. So let me first let you know who our guests are. First of all, let's start with Hermann. Hermann, you've sat at the intersection of brand and strategy for a long time. You were the CEO of North America at Fitch, among many other roles along your career around the world. It'd be good to hear from you just a little bit about your background and maybe some of the key learnings along the way.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Brandon. You're right. I mean, I've been in this business, I hate to say it, but close to 20 years now. And I've worked in Dubai, where I set up a business, a significant branding business. We were on that sort of growth curve from 2004 through to 2008. There was a huge growth spurt in Dubai, and we were part of really introducing the importance of brand, but not just brand in terms of brand identity or logos, which was really the reference point that in those days that people had for brand, but introducing the concept of brand strategy as a core value creator, a core component to what businesses needed to consider as they developed and designed their kind of future. So that was where I started. That was where I sort of started my brand consulting life. And then of course I came across here to North America and ran the Fitch business, where we focused more on how brand expresses itself through experience, and particularly retail experience and environmental branding and experience. So from banks to retail stores, luxury stores, you name it. In terms of the learnings, I think the fundamental thing is I think we still fight as brand practitioners. We still fight to help to get companies to recognize the value that brand actually has. And I'm not just talking balance sheet values. I think there's been a lot of talk about, there's been a lot of PR around the value of brand. And we know the top 100 brands are now worth over $1 trillion, huge value. But just how important brand is in terms of defining the future direction of a business, bringing the customer perspective into looking at how business needs to move forward and how business needs to be set up for future success. And I think that piece is still critically important, across all the consultancy work that I've done.
It's really interesting. I mean, in my career, I've had the opportunity to work more on a lot on business strategy, a lot on customer experience, and to be very honest, very rarely, if ever, did I engage with or interact with people working on the brand doing that. There seemed to be a disconnect between doing business strategy, telling the narrative to customers, and actually how that manifests itself in a brand and in the brand story. Manny, you and I had the chance to work together recently as we refreshed and launched our own new brand at Elixirr. And there was something that I certainly learned as we did that process of, wow, how powerful it can be and how important it is as we talk about what we're trying to achieve as a business, and how strong of a tie there is to the brand and the narrative behind the brand. Do you want to talk a little bit about your background and kind of also your impressions?
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Yeah, so I'm a big believer in the fact that you can solve really tough business issues with creative thinking. And that kind of pushed me towards brand, I was in kind of this middle phase of where I loved the strategical work of it. But then how does that translate across the visual identity? And then how can the visual identity help a business achieve what it wants to do with its future growth plans, for example, or speaking to an audience in a different country that they might not have spoken to before, and how do they hone their identity to help them do that. So those kind of issues I love trying to solve. And the Elixirr rebrand actually was quite a tough one to solve, because we are an internal team essentially, and they're generally the hardest projects to do. It's difficult to remove yourself. But the way in which we try to do it is kind of break down all of the issues, or critically analyze the current identity and try and work out whether it can perform better for what we're trying to do in the next 5-10 years. So that kind of what we're used to fulfilling workshops and criticizing methodologies and ways of working. So we very much did that for our own identity. We looked at ways we could improve it, where we could tweak it, where we could look at messaging, how the color palette was working, whether it worked well on print, kind of all the best graphic design principles were applied to it. But then also, I think what was really key was we tested it, and we spoke to our audiences. We spoke to all of them, or any that we could speak to try and find out where it could be improved. And then by taking those findings, we produced a brand strategy that we felt would work for us, but not only for us presenting ourselves to the market, but also, is it right for the firm? Is it right for the employees? Do you identify with it? Because it's essentially, a brand should be something that people at that company are very proud of and identify with, because at the end of the day, people are your biggest ambassadors. So yeah, there's a lot of crossover between strategy and design. And I think some businesses don't realize how much visual identity tweaks or changes can actually help them amplify their message across their market, and also help protect them. It's that kind of age-old argument of brand versus brand-led. Although brand-led takes more investment and takes longer, you can really corner yourself in a market and protect kind of your products and services, because people identify you in that market.
It is amazing. I mean, as I do a lot of work around, new proposition design, launching a new product or proposition to the market. Of course, we talk about the story, we do the customer testing, we go out there and really, make sure the proposition is really touching people emotionally and reaching them. But again, I think far too often we're not talking about the visual identity, how it needs to look and feel, and how it needs to be communicated in different ways, not just the product or the proposition. But if you're a leader in business, how can you tell if your brand's working or not working for your business? And what are the right times when should it be addressed? Herman, Manny, Herman, you want to try to take that?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. I think, the fact is, brand change is actually quite a costly exercise, and it requires a commitment from the top. It's something that has to be properly budgeted. So, and making a decision to evolve your brand is not something that should be taken lightly. It is a significant decision. But the fact is, when you go through a branding process, I think it needs to be seen less as just the end point where you get to, and it should be seen as a process of change that can actually be used to enable the organization to engage in a new conversation around where you're going and what the future might hold. So it's a core part of change management, and I think leaders have to look they have to look at their business and ask themselves the simple question: is my business stronger than my brand, or is my brand stronger than my business? And what I mean by that is, if you've got a strong brand and the business is not performing at the level that the brand needs to deliver the promise, ultimately you're going to dilute your brand, and you cannot be a successful business if you don't have a strong brand. More and more, the world is, it's more and more difficult to differentiate on products and services alone. We've seen how fast competition comes in and just does exactly what you're doing. Information is out there, it's free, and it's hard to hold competitive advantage from a functional product and services perspective. But your brand has you can defend your brand, and your brand actually has so much resilience in terms of customer loyalty and the value that you deliver. So, I mean, what I'm really saying here is that I think you have to ask yourself, is my brand strong enough for where my business is today? or do I need to rethink my brand? Is my brand aligned to the direction that the company is going in? Whether that be new customers that we're going after, a new promise, a new purpose, anything like that would trigger a response around the brand and whether the brand is fit for purpose.
Yeah, and I assume it's not like, okay, now we're going to work on the brand and it's a one-time thing and it's like a big, a big bang. Now it's this. Okay, maybe if you change your visual identity, there are elements of that. But I assume your brand's evolving every week, every time you're putting out a new message, every time you're working on a new product, every time you're testing and learning how your product or proposition is resonating in the market, you're constantly iterating on the story and the narrative and the brand. Isn't that true? Or is it? Yeah, go ahead, Manny.
Sorry. Yeah, I think the brands that stand still generally tend to be forgotten. I think the brand evolution is called brand evolution because it should be changing all the time. You should always kind of test, iterate. You should look at your brand critically. I think if you're going to speak to a new audience, you should really think about whether your messaging works for that audience, whether if you're, like Herman says, if you're expanding your products and services, does your architecture work for you? I think it was a key issue that BT went through. I think they realized that their products and services were expanding. Their architecture became unmanageable. Their teams were finding it difficult to use the assets they were given. You kind of had this almost schizophrenic identity across all of their different products and services. So they came up with an architecture that really streamlined that and helped their brand become more manageable, not just for their internal teams, but then what that translates into is customers seeing your identity, their recognition of your identity increases. They understand when they see the BT purple that it's probably a BT ad. They understand that the tone of voice that they might be seeing on a messaging is, oh, that's BT, and that over time builds with clever copywriting and good ad campaigns. So yeah, I think it should always evolve. I think the best brands do constantly evolve. You only have to look at kind of Nike and Apple and etc., who are kind of evolving their brands all the time. But at the core, there's always a really strong foundation, and that's generally based on a foundational idea, like a larger idea. Like with Volvo, for example, you have safety. With Coca-Cola, you have progress and optimism. Lego, you have play and creation. Everything is kind of built from that foundation. Which is what we worked really hard to do with the Elixirr rebrand.
Yeah, I must say I agree with all of that, and I think the sort of idea that I've always often used to sort of describe that is brand is a living thing. It's not the old days of a brand guideline becoming the sort of Bible for the brand, and this is what it is, and everybody trying to sort of comply. I think we've moved from compliance to really creating a living brand and an experience that is living and evolves over time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more from what I could see. I just want to remind everyone who's viewing today that if you want to ask us a question or make a comment, just do so in the comments and we'll be able to see you. And if you ask a question, I'll be sure and ask the guys on the show. So Manny, you've referred a little bit to some of the work that we did internally at Elixirr to do our rebrand. Do you think maybe it'd be helpful just to kind of walk people through what that process was or what that looks like and what the thinking was? Does that make sense?
Yeah, we have some prepared images that we can show.
Okay.
First one is of the old identity now. So this is just kind of a snapshot of the Elixirr identity before we rebranded. The logo mark on the left-hand side, a snapshot of the color palette, and our website, and then also there's a sub-brand example in the bottom right, and then some further assets. So what we felt was there was almost a disconnect between the identity. It almost felt too traditional. We felt that we'd outgrown it. Elixirr's product offering had increased over time, and the assets that were being created were starting to feel inconsistent because of the reactive nature of building a brand that didn't have a strong foundation. So with the new identity, what we've done is we've approached it in the same way in which we approach client work, kind of trying to create something that's fluid and dynamic, that feels like there's a sense of purpose to it, something that's different to incumbents in the market, but that's us at our core, and really speaks to Elixirr's ethos. So We doubled down on the Challenger consultancy, which is the brand platform, and built our messaging from that. And then also expanded the visual identity around a hero symbol, which you can see in the logo mark, called the Lex, which is a almost fluid-like shape that when you look at it statically, it feels like there's a sense of movement to it, but then over animation and motion graphics and other media, it can morph into different layouts and compositions, but then also takes on a life of its own. It becomes a visual metaphor for the alchemy of our teams, the speed at which we deliver, and also there's an aspect of it that refers to the way in which we shine a light on opportunities for our clients. So really trying to create something that was Elixirr at its core, really spoke to the culture of the team, their ways of working, and just to try and differentiate ourselves in the market, really, but something that everybody can get behind and give us a strong platform for our growth plans. Whilst also looking at the brand architecture, a big part of it was producing an identity that was manageable as Elixirr grows and evolves through the House of Brand strategy. So trying to come up with ways in which we can create an architecture whereby those companies that are part of the Elixirr group know how to use the assets or can take ownership of certain deliverables that that would be branded for themselves with a clear structure.
Makes a lot of sense. And having been part of the process and the amount of time we spent really getting the brief right and talking about what it meant to us, I think was key. And obviously it wasn't just the visual identity, it was also how we talked about the brand and the videos we produced, how we did the copy. It was holistic. And the fact that we did it in about 10 weeks was pretty miraculous. We've got a question that's come in. I'd like to ask it from Jessica. How can businesses successfully rebrand without shocking their customers or even damaging their consumer loyalty? We've obviously, there are lots of examples in the markets where a rebrand has not gone down well. So how do you do it? What are some of the keys to success?
I think the first thing is one of the challenges I think companies that haven't kept their brand up to date is that sometimes they have to make shocking moves. In other words, they have to instead of being able to evolve and move the brand to the next step or next level, they have to actually go through a major revolutionary change because the brand just doesn't reflect who they are today. So I think businesses have a choice. You can leave your brand to exist for 20 years, and then suddenly you wake up and you realize that the brand no longer represents the business, and that requires a bigger change, and it carries some risk. But I think that there is the developing brand is there's a little bit of science and magic, and I think Manny captures that beautifully. By the way, I came in late into the process of the brand launch at Elixirr, and I wish I'd been part of it because I think the team have done a stunning job. What I love is the way that the partners and the consultants have all really engaged around the new brand. The uptake has been amazing, and that's a great reflection of actually the work that's been done. Is how people actually engaged around it. But you can research and test brand messaging. There's various scientific methods of actually identifying where the risks might be, managing those risks. Change sometimes is difficult, but required.
Man, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think you're always going to shock customers if there is a rebrand. If there's something as simple as changing your color palette can shock people. And now that kind of in the world of social media where everyone has a voice and everyone's kind of an expert in multiple things, I think it's difficult to not have opinions that potentially contradict what you're trying to do. But I think what's key is obviously research, lots of it, speaking to your audiences, trying to really define what your business is, and speaking to those customers and seeing if those perceptions are the same as your own, I think is really key. And then, like Herman says, there are a number of methodologies you can use. There's things in graphic design that you will be perceived in the way in which you'd like it to be perceived, like the psychology of color, etc. But I think just being honest with your consumers, I think making them part of the process really helps. And a big thing is storytelling. I think if you can tell the story of your brand very well, people will identify with it and they'll understand where you're coming from. But then also, I think this is quite a controversial thing to say, but I think I don't think it's necessarily a bad.
We're okay with that on this program.
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to shock your customers or go in a completely different direction. I think of kind of the 2012 Olympics. That identity was vilified in the press, and then it turned out to be a huge success. We're kind of seeing something similar with Aberdeen and Standard Life at the moment. Mm-hmm. And I kind of feel that if founders and leaders can execute well and trust in the strategy and then be patient, generally it works out in the end. And it wasn't really as risky as it seemed to be at the start.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, as always on this show, it's always we always feel like we wish we had more time, but I'm afraid we're at the end of the time we have for today. I want to thank Manny and Herman for joining me today, and we'd love to continue to engage on this topic. So if you have a question or you have a comment, just keep posting in the comments, whether it's today or when you see the replay, and we'll be sure to engage with you along the way. Manny, Herman, have a fantastic weekend. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time on Challenger Network News.
Cheers. Thank you.